Last week, the Associated Press reported a number of low-flying planes operated by the FBI flying over multiple cities in the U.S. The FBI created fake companies to hide these planes. The planes carried surveillance equipment, which was reportedly used without a judge's approval. And I believe that's a great place to bring in today's roundtable.
Please welcome in columnist and radio host Tim Constantine, also joining us as former Deputy Staff Secretary for President Bill Clinton and President of Goodfriend Government Affairs, David Goodfriend, not Rick Unger. He's coming up next hour. My bad.
Yes.
We want to welcome David in with us. Guys, let's talk about this issue. We know last week there were a lot of folks trumpeting this big victory for advocates of personal freedom with the end of parts of the Patriot Act. But meantime, we're learning about this surveillance footage, which can be captured by these planes and then handed over for prosecutions. For example, here you are looking at a video from a special surveillance helicopter with thermal imaging used by the Boston Marathon Police Department while they were capturing the suspect hidden under that tarp. David, should we just basically, again, get used to the idea that even after changes to the Patriot Act, Big Brother is always going to be watching?
Well, I don't think we should ever get used to the idea. We should always be mindful of our rights as Americans under the Fourth Amendment to privacy from government invasion, unless, of course, law enforcement has gotten a warrant with probable cause and having followed procedures. I mean, look, I've said this on Newsmax before when I've shown up here. This is an area where progressives and conservatives often come together for different reasons, but under the same heading of we don't want our privacy invaded by government unless the proper procedures have been followed. When the founders of our nation created the Fourth Amendment, they were reacting to British soldiers busting down the door of patriots whenever they felt like it. And now we think we have this process whereby somebody has to go to a court, go to a judge, get a warrant. The problem we have is that so much information is available already that I think people's expectations are shifting. The legal standard is, well, what's the reasonable expectation of privacy in any given circumstance? If people start to just accept that we're always going to be watched, that expectation of privacy goes down. I don't think we should accept it. I think we should remain vigilant in setting boundaries for where the government can and cannot invade our privacy.
Okay, we had the example there of the Boston Marathon bombing suspect where clearly there was probable cause for that helicopter to be used. But then you also hear about, Tim, the FBI creating these shadow companies for these airplanes. That really begs a lot of questions.
Yeah, I agree with my good friend, David Goodfriend, in that you can't just ignore the Fourth Amendment. You cannot create these shadow organizations, these shadow companies. You can't intentionally deceive the American public so that you can watch the American public. Something here is clearly wrong. You mentioned the Boston bombing suspect, and I would go even a step further. If people wanted to help, they certainly should have. And most of Boston and most of America wanted those suspects found. But I remember when they narrowed down where the suspect was, they didn't know he was in that boat yet, but they knew the general neighborhood. And they went to people's homes and hollered at people to get out of their own home, and then went in and searched every single home looking. And I know it was a serious situation, but at the same time, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
I remember vividly those shelter-in-place orders coming down. It's almost like martial law.
Well, David and Tim, I think the vast majority of Americans agree with you. According to a new Gallup poll, an increase in Americans wanting their civil liberties respected when it comes to anti-terrorism efforts. In 2002, the percentage was about equal. And now, here in 2015, 65% of Americans agree the government should take steps to prevent terrorism, but not steps that could violate civil liberties.
Who are the 35% that don't want that?
The people
they're out there.
who want to live in a prison cell.
There are people
They're scared.
Yeah.
I think that if I just jump in here real quick, I think fear makes us do really stupid things.
Yeah.
And if you go back to the Patriot Act, the Senate passed it 99-1. The one vote against was Senator Russ Feingold from Wisconsin, who said, I'm worried about the dangerous federalization of law enforcement here. I mean, that was a pretty progressive Democrat saying, shouldn't we have law enforcement be done at a more local level instead of giving the federal government these vast surveillance powers? And here we are today, just having had the vote after the Edward Snowden expose. So the one thing I want to add to this conversation, though, is we can talk about the government all day long. There also is a need to look at what private industry is doing in collecting information about us, because that gives the government a one-stop shop to go to to get that information. And I actually think we're overdue for updating our privacy laws so that there are some general practices that we can expect private industry to follow as well. Otherwise, all the FBI has to do is, instead of setting up its own fake corporation, it'll just go to Google and get it from them. And unless Google, of course, has had some practice for protecting our privacy in the first place. That, I think, is sort of the next frontier of this debate.
And that's what, in effect, is happening with the USA Freedom Act, where you have these cell phone providers now holding all this data as opposed to the federal government. And they also have an idea, David, to incentivize. I mean, not to incentivize, they have an incentive to profitize that personal information. They can sell that.
Right.
Profit from it.
We still have more to come. So we're going to ask you both to stick around for round 2 of our roundtable. We'll be right back. You're watching Newsmax Now.
And please welcome back to part 2 of our roundtable, columnist and radio host Tim Constantine and former Deputy Staff Secretary for President Bill Clinton and President of Goodfriend Government Affairs, David Goodfriend.
All right, guys, you ready for our next topic? According to the New York Times, President Obama's ex-press secretary, Robert Gibbs, is becoming the new chief spokesperson for Mickey D's.
Now, this is not, of course, the first time the corporations have taken from a pool of presidential advisors. We can look at Jay Carney, hired by Amazon in February. David Plouffe has done a lot, hired by Uber as a quote-unquote campaign manager. And Peter Orszag, who once directed the Office of Management and Budget for 2 years, took a job as vice chairman of Citigroup. But there's not necessarily anything new to this. But my question is for you, David. Since Robert Gibbs has been such a vocal proponent of the Obama administration, can he really serve a role like this, being the spokesman for Mickey D's? I just can't see it.
Well, I think it reflects more the direction that McDonald's wants to go than it does anything about Robert Gibbs. I don't think it's a particularly, big event that a former White House spokesman goes and works for a big company. I think the big event here is that McDonald's has chosen somebody who is visibly progressive, who's taken some very progressive stances in his own right, not just when he was representing the president. And I think it portends future moves by McDonald's towards trying to broaden its appeal and to try to, frankly, work with some of the things that have come up. So, for example, we know that the SEIU, Service Employees International Union, has been pushing hard to raise the wages of fast food workers. I think that there's been a lot of health experts calling for better practices in McDonald's foods. My hope is that what we're seeing here is an effort by McDonald's to respond to those things and not simply paper it over by saying, okay, we just hired a liberal guy, so everything's done.
They have done some of this.
My view is that he'll probably play a very productive and substantive role within the executive suite at McDonald's and try to help steer that company to a broader market segment.
Well, let me ask you this, Tim, though. But if you have a guy like Robert Gibbs, who, as David pointed out, has been, very progressive in his own life and also working underneath the Obama administration, do you think they run the risk, though, of McDonald's of alienating a lot of Americans in this country?
No, I think if you're going to McDonald's, you're probably not looking at your political choices. It's not why you choose that restaurant. You're probably not looking at your long-term health choices, even though they now offer more in the way of salads or less in the way of hormone-infused chicken. You're not picking McDonald's for your health choices. I do think there's a little irony here that you have the spokesman for kind of the fast food president, where they weren't looking a lot of times at long-term policy that would help the United States. They were looking for the quick hit, and now he's working in the fast food industry. So it all kind of comes full circle.
Yeah,
we have politics, though, involved in so many things today, guys. Politics is everywhere. It invades almost every part of our life. I mean, it seems as though it's invading our fast food choices as well.
Really?
Well, I mean, if you're going to say that, then you have to talk to Dana Perino, who worked for President Bush, and ask what corporate clients she has. I don't think that's really anything new or different. I do think that it would have been far, far more of a kind of head snap back moment if Robert Gibbs had gone to work for, I don't know, ExxonMobil or something.
No,
I agree with you, David, there. Definitely.
I loved his work singing for the Bee Gees, too, by the way. Oh, I'm sorry, that was Robin Gibbs. Never mind.
Oh, yeah, different Gibbs.
Different Gibbs.
The Australian Gibbs. Let's move on also, because a picture popped up yesterday that might indicate the current stress level our president is facing while President Obama was in Europe, maybe doing a very European thing.
Right.
Some saying that this picture right here shows President Obama holding a pack of cigarettes. The Washington Post published an article saying let President Obama have a cigarette already. David, is it okay for the commander-in-chief to sneak a butt every once in a while?
Did you just call it a
just
butt?
had a conversation. Yes, we're talking about cigarettes, right?
Cigarettes, yeah.
Sure.
That's what they used to call it back a
Different
long time
president
ago.
he served under.
We just had a conversation about privacy. I think there's.
But he's the
certain things-
president.
The president's entitled to a certain amount of privacy. Now, I will tell you, the president worked really hard to stop smoking. He worked really hard to reduce and then eliminate any cigarettes from his life. And a lot of Americans have gone through that experience and can relate to that experience. If every now and then he falls off the wagon and has to work hard to get it back, that makes him human. That makes him like millions of Americans, and I don't think we ought to fault him for it.
Right. I
I
mean,
thought
it's not
David
like
was going to
he's-
use the phrase degrade and destroy his nicotine habit.
Well, I mean, it's, it's not like he's on camera doing it all the time or handing them out, at White House parties. It's like, here's your little token.
I'll tell you the bigger issue for me, if I can, if he smokes, he smokes. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But they have made a great point of saying, no, he's quit. He hasn't smoked for a long time. And if they lie to us, that's the issue. If you know what, he says, hey, I fell off the wagon, I had a cigarette, I'm with David. He's human, he's allowed. But if they lie to us, about a cigarette on a balcony, what else are they lying to us about?
Good question.
Well, I would be,
David, unfortunately, we've got to wrap it up right there, but we can pick it up another time. David Goodfriend, Tim Constantine, thank you so much for being with us. I don't know, I just wonder if it says something about his level of stress right now. Obviously, a lot going on.
I think the
Concerned
gray
about
hair.
Obamacare, the legacy. It's got another brush with dead coming up with the Supreme Court, and foreign policy not looking too good.